Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, which has turned my life into one long night, 7 times cursed and 7 times sealed. Imagine a world where a single night lasts forever, casting a permanent shadow over the soul of a 15-year-old boy. In a matter of hours, the gas chambers of Auschwitz swallowed Eliezer's family, his childhood, and his faith in a just God, leaving behind only the cold ashes of survival. Night is not just a memoir of historical atrocities. It is a terrifying, deeply intimate exploration of how a human being can survive physically when their entire spiritual self has been systematically put to death. 1. The ignored warnings of Sighet. The story begins in the small, deeply religious town of Sighet, Transylvania, now Romania, in the early 1940s. We meet Eliezer, a devout 12-year-old Jewish boy who spends his days crying over the destruction of the temple and dreaming of learning the mysteries of the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism. He finds an unlikely mentor in Moishe the Beadle, a poor, eccentric, and deeply spiritual town outcast. In 1942, all foreign Jews in Sighet are deported by the Hungarian police, including Moishe. Months later, Moishe returns to Sighet by some miracle. He is no longer the same man, his eyes are hollow and his soul is broken. He tells a horrific tale. The Gestapo took the deportees into the Polish forests, forced them to dig massive trenches, and systematically executed them, even throwing babies into the air for target practice. Moishe begs the townspeople to listen and prepare, but the community refuses to believe him. They dismiss him as a madman seeking pity or money. This introduces one of the book's central tragedies, the human capacity for denial in the face of unimaginable horror. Even as Hungarian police established ghettos in Sighet in 1944, the Jews convince themselves that the Red Army is coming and the Germans will never reach them until the cattle cars arrive. 2. The sealed train and Madame Schachter's vision. Eliezer, his family, and 80 other townspeople are herded into a wooden cattle car. The doors are nailed shut. They are given only a few pieces of bread and a little water. The heat is stifling, the air is thick, and basic human dignity begins to fray under the pressure of terror and dehydration. In the dark of the train, Madame Schachter, a middle-aged woman separated from her husband and 2 older sons, loses her mind. On the 3rd night, she begins screaming hysterically, "Look! Look at this fire! This terrible fire! Have mercy on me!" The terrified passengers look through the narrow wooden slats, seeing nothing but empty, pitch-black night. To quiet her bone-chilling screams, the passengers bind her, gag her, and eventually beat her to keep her silent. Her madness, however, is a prophecy. When the train finally grinds to a halt in the dead of night, the passengers look out the windows. The air is thick with the sweet, sickening smell of burning flesh, and giant chimneys are spewing roaring flames into the sky. They have arrived at Auschwitz-Birkenau. 3. The gates of hell, arrival and separation. Upon stepping off the train, Eliezer hears the 8 words that will shatter his world forever: men to the left, women to the right. In a split second, Eliezer and his father, Shlomo, are separated from his mother and his little sister, Zipporah. He catches a fleeting glimpse of Zipporah's red coat as she disappears into the crowd. He will never see them again. Eliezer and his father march toward the selection line, where the notorious Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death, is directing prisoners with his baton. A seasoned prisoner whispers crucial advice: lie about their ages. Eliezer claims he is 18 instead of 15, and Shlomo claims he is 40 instead of 50. This lie saves them from immediate execution. As they walk further into the camp, Eliezer witnesses a ditch of towering flames where truckloads of babies and small children are being burned alive. It is at this moment that Wiesel writes his most famous, heartbreaking passage. Never shall I forget that night, the first night in camp, which has turned my life into one long night, 7 times cursed and 7 times sealed. Never shall I forget those flames which consumed my faith forever. Never shall I forget those moments which murdered my God and my soul, and turned my dreams to dust. Eliezer and Shlomo survive the initial selection and are moved to the main camp and eventually to Buna, a labor camp where Eliezer's identity is stripped away and replaced with a number tattooed onto his left arm, a 7713. 4. Life in Buna, the hanging of the angel. At Buna, Eliezer and his father are assigned to an electrical warehouse, which is relatively light work. However, the daily reality is a grueling fight for physical survival, dominated by hunger, cold, and the constant threat of violence from sadistic capos, prisoner foremen. Eliezer's world shrinks to the primitive coordinates of survival, a bowl of watery soup and a stale crust of bread. He watches his father get beaten by their capo, Idek, and feels a wave of shame not because he hates Idek, but because he feels angry at his father for not knowing how to avoid the blows. The camp is slowly grinding away his capacity for empathy. The climax of Eliezer's spiritual crisis occurs when the Gestapo publicly hangs a young, beautiful assistant, a Papel, who was beloved by all the prisoners for his angelic face. Because the boy is too light, the rope does not snap his neck. He hangs there, choking and struggling for life between heaven and earth for over half an hour. Behind Eliezer, a man whimpers, "Where is merciful God? Where is he?" And inside Eliezer, a voice answers, "Where is he? This is he is hanging here on this gallows." With the death of the innocent child, the traditional, merciful God of Eliezer's childhood dies as well. 5. The Death March Through the Snow. By the winter of 1944, the Soviet Red Army is rapidly advancing toward Buna. The Nazis decide to evacuate the camp and force the prisoners on a grueling trek deeper into Germany. Eliezer is in the camp hospital recovering from a foot operation. He and his father must choose, stay in the hospital or join the evacuation. Fearing the Nazis will slaughter anyone left behind, they choose to march, only to learn after the war that the patients left in the hospital were liberated by the Russians 2 days later. The evacuation becomes a death march. Under icy winter winds and blinding snow, thousands of prisoners are forced to run at gunpoint. Anyone who stops, stumbles, or sleeps is shot instantly by the SS or trampled by the desperate crowd. During the march, Eliezer witnesses a terrifying breakdown of the father-son bond. He sees a boy named Zalman purposely abandon his aging, struggling father to increase his own chances of survival. Eliezer, though no longer believing in God, finds himself praying, "O God, Master of the universe, give me the strength never to do what Rabbi Eliyahu's son has done."
6. Gleiwitz and the Shattered Violin. The exhausted survivors reach Gleiwitz, where they are crushed into suffocating barracks. People are piled on top of each other, literally suffocating to death in the dark. From beneath the crushing weight of dying bodies, Eliezer hears a strange, beautiful sound. It is his Polish friend, Juliek, playing Beethoven's concerto on his violin. In a place of absolute darkness and death, where playing German music was forbidden to Jews, Juliek plays his soul out to an audience of corpses and dying men. The next morning, Eliezer wakes up to find Juliek dead, and his beloved violin smashed beside him, a symbol of the destruction of art, beauty, and humanity. 7. The Train of Despair and the Death of Shlomo. From Gleiwitz, the prisoners are crammed into roofless, open coal cars for a 10-day journey in freezing temperatures. They have no food or water, surviving only by eating the snow off each other's shoulders. At one train station, German civilians throw breadcrumbs into the carriage just to watch the starving prisoners tear each other apart for amusement. Eliezer watches in horror as an old man secretly hides a piece of bread for himself, only for his own son to beat him to death to steal it. Moments later, the son is attacked and killed by other prisoners. Of the 100 prisoners who boarded Eliezer's cattle car, only 12 survived the journey to Buchenwald. Among them are Eliezer and his father. In Buchenwald, Shlomo's health collapses completely. He suffers from dysentery, and Eliezer is forced to care for him while his own body screams for survival. The other prisoners beat Shlomo because he can no longer control his bowels. On the night of January 28, 1945, Eliezer lies in the bunk above his father. Shlomo weakly calls out his name, "Eliezer. Eliezer." Fearing the heavy clubs of the guards, Eliezer remains silent and does not move. When he wakes up the next morning, his father's body is gone, taken to the crematory while Eliezer slept. He has no tears left to cry. Instead, in the darkest corner of his heart, he feels a crushing wave of guilt and relief, free at last. 8. Liberation and the mirror. Eliezer spends his remaining months in Buchenwald in a state of emotional numbness. He thinks only of food, soup, bread, survival. On April 11, 1945, an armed resistance movement inside the camp takes action, and American tanks arrive at the gates. The prisoners are liberated. Eliezer's first act as a free man is not to seek revenge or find family, it is simply to eat bread. A few days later, Eliezer falls critically ill with food poisoning and spends 2 weeks in the hospital. One day, he gathers the strength to stand up and look into a mirror, something he has not done since leaving Sighet. The book closes with one of the most haunting images in literature. From the depths of the mirror, a corpse was gazing back at me. The look in his eyes as he gazed into mine has never left me.